Hello, my name is Henry Chervenka. I'm the CEO of 3D Dynamic Studios, and we are currently doing AI weapon detection. Something you may or may not know about me is I enjoy hard surface modeling in ZBrush. I've been doing this for several years, and I'm excited to share some tips and workflows with you guys today. So a really quick overview, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to start off with a couple talking points. First is going to be the benefits of ZBrush for hard surface. And then the next one will be the modeling workflow that I like to do. Then we're going to jump into ZBrush, and I'm going to show my initial steps for modeling a tank. And these initial steps are kind of like what I do for every step going into a hard surface project. Then we'll go into a demo, and we're going to talk about a couple things with taming complexity. Then we're going to talk about topology and some small tips that are, can save you some troubles down the line. So first off, the benefits of ZBrush for hard surface modeling. It's more of an organic and artistic approach. What I mean by that is when you're doing hard surface in traditional modeling packages, there's a lot of pausing to type in numbers or side panel detours. For ZBrush, they kind of approach it in where all the action stays on the canvas. So a couple examples of that is ZBrush. What ZBrush is all your basic tools for hard surface modeling into one brush. And so with this is you get the ease and comfort of modeling with just one click. It's also context sensitive. So if you hover over a face, it gives you everything according to that face. You hover over an edge, a point, so on. So also another benefit is you don't have to go to any place to interact with the modeling tools that you select. What you can do is use your mouse or pen movements to either interactively change the polys or the resolution. And another way ZBrush incorporates this is the Gizmo. What the Gizmo does, it has all your primitives stored right there. And based on your Gizmo orientation is how that primitive is coming in. And you can adjust it, again, right on the canvas, so there's no broken rhythm. Also, there's a lot of deformers that's in the Gizmo. And again, those, you can adjust those by cones. And this approach is kind of like, it's just more fluid, and also, it doesn't break the rhythm. So the momentum keeps on going. To continue this, ZBrush is very customizable for your workspace, depending on your workflow and what you need as an artist. One benefit is hotkeys. They're so easily accessible. You can, almost everything in ZBrush, you press Control-Alt, and just type your hotkey and you're ready to go. Another one is custom UI. Anything you want to put on a custom UI, it's right there. Your most common tools, you throw it on there. And the last one, which is like I think the most underutilized, is macros. Macros is a series of actions that it records, and it's one button you click and it goes through it all. And that's a real time saver when you're repeatedly doing the same action over and over again, and you have to go through different panels to keep on switching and doing it. ZBrush will record that, and you can even assign a hotkey to it, so it even speeds up the process even more. The next benefit is poly count flexibility. So when you're in ZBrush, you have the ability to see the entire model in its whole. And that is really beneficial as far as like when you're adjusting proportions to other parts in your model. It's nice to see that instead of trying to hide the model because of the limitations that other softwares have. Another benefit is the poly count versatilities. This means you can go high, you can go low. ZBrush can handle it all. And speaking of that, that what brings up me to my next point, which is the modeling workflow. So I kind of break it down into two phases when I'm approaching a model. The first phase, I just want to tackle the shape and proportions, and then I don't care about topology at this point, and I'll use anything ZBrush has to offer to get that task done. And then after I get the right shape and proportions done, then I'll go to phase two, and then I'll worry about topology. Now, sometimes you don't really need to worry about it because the part is simple enough where you can just box model it out. Other times, when you do more complex shapes, it's really nice and convenient just to throw a bunch of models, polys at it and sculpt away. And to get back to the topology refinement, I use two different techniques. One is ZRemesher, when I'm using polygroups to guide the edge flow, and then other times I'll use ZModeler, which is I'll either adjust the ZRemesher a little bit, or I can manually retopple that with the ZModeler brush. So we're going to jump into ZBrush real quick, and we're going to start getting going with the demo.
You guys excited? Yes. Henry, we actually did have a question online.
Okay.
I want to throw your way. Feel free to answer it whenever. But the question is, how do you manage scale, and do you have any advice for environment artists who are trying to manage this?
Yeah, for scale, this is what I'm going to kind of touch on right here, but usually it's based on proportion, right? So if you get the proportion of the model right, you can take it and in any other program and scale it up, and it should be right. As long as you're not trying to go for precision millimeter measurements, this workflow will work. So,
excellent, thank you.
Yeah, here's the tank. This is what I modeled for the summit today. And what I want to talk about, let's start out with the block out here. So as you can see, we have, let's see here. This is what I started out with. So as long as I get the proportions of this block out right, and you can see the wireframe here, it's very low. I don't need to capture everything. I just need a base. I kind of need where the tread goes, the wheels, and the top. And from this, I can just build everything else according to the relationships of each part. So now the problem here is when we start in ZBrush, it's a lot different than what I have here. Now the first thing I do is I want to unify. That's what this is right now. This one right down here, the block out, is unified. And what unify does is it rescales the subtool so the largest dimensions is roughly within the 2 by 2 by 2 unit cube. It also relocates the subtool to the world axis center of 0, 0, 0. Now the reason we want to do this is because there's several reasons. One, it ensures the brushes work correctly. Navigation becomes a little weird if you go too high or too low in the scale. And ZBrush features, for example, like Dynamesh, work as expected. Also, it offers a consistent starting point for adjusting your model scale according to its dimensions. And that's what I kind of do to get everything set up. If I start here, unified block out, now I know this is the largest proportions of this model. Everything else I have to scale down. So what I'll do is I'll just scale it up a little bit till it's roughly the size I want. Now if I work down in size, I know I'm not going to have any issues. So also another thing I want to do, we bring up the Gizmo. I want to make sure I'm Z-forward with this model. The benefit of that is a lot of ZBrush features, especially with symmetry, start off natively with Z-forward wide up. Another thing I always do is I want to turn off perspective. A reason for that is I'm trying to eliminate perspective distortion, especially when using brushes like clip, trim, knife, and slice. And that's kind of how I start every project. And after that, that's like, if I got this, I know that have a really good chance of success down the line. All right, so let's go to the demo. So for this, here we have the tank treads. Now there's a lot of ways to approach this getting started. So when I'm looking at this, for me, I'm going to narrow down the two possible ways I can do this. I can either do it with nano mesh or array mesh. The reason that I went with one over the other is because of this. I need to align this perfectly within this rear wheel here. So for that reason, I went with nano mesh. So initially, let's get this started. I started with a cylinder, so it matches the wheel in space. Use extender to move it out, shape it, and then make sure, the important thing with this is that all these faces are even. That's going to be a key point with our nano mesh. Then I'll grab a model of the tank tread. And what I'm looking for here is I want to make sure all these bolts are a different poly group, because I want to separate out that later to lower the poly count when it's all together. So what I'll do here, how to grab it is line it flat. You can rotate, hold shift, snap it. I like to use the B hotkey, and then I'll just say create insert mesh. I'll say new, and then I'll press B and say create nano mesh brush. Now I'm all ready to go for the next step. So when you align it in, this is kind of what you're going to get here. But if we turn on the wheel, turn the wheel back on, turn everything else out, you'll see there's an issue. And that is, it's not exactly lining up the way I want. And ZBrush has a really nice fix for this. So we go down to nano mesh. And what we're looking for is we're looking for the Y offset here. And now we can just move it along the Y offset just to kind of adjust what we need here. Another issue you might run into is if I zoom out here, the tread might not align as you expect, but ZModeler has the solution for that too. So if we go to, let's see here, if we go to, I want to see spin edges, and we can even go flat iron for this. So I want to click, you'll see that lined up. For these, we can hover it over, say a single poly, and we can manually just adjust these in place, and now everything is looking correct. So for the next one here, we're going to talk about the grid. This is kind of in the back area of the tank. And it might look complex, but it's fairly easy to get to this point. So the first thing I want to do is we'll go down here. As you can see, this is actually micropoly, and it all starts from just a plane. And for micropoly, what we really want to focus on here is flat subdivisions, because if we do smooth, we're going to start losing the volume. So we want about 2, turn it on, and the amount of flat subdivisions we do is going to adjust how much micropoly is in there. Go back up to here, and let's see here. We also have So for the next example, I want to talk about, to get to this point, what I'll do is I'll use the noise slider, and then you can see we can start getting a basic shape, start adding variation. Also, you might be tempted to use the move brush. Let me pick, let's see here, we'll use move. Just a scale. We start moving, you'll see some distortions here with the micropoly. An option I like to do is use the cloth move. In this example, we'll see that less distortion will happen when we start moving it. It just gives me a better predictable results. Okay, next example will be our wheels. Let's see here. So for this, let's see here. Before I start, do we have any questions, Ian?
We don't have, well, does anybody here have any questions first? Let's start there. No. Okay, cool. You do have a question. Here, I'm going to come to you so that everyone can hear it. There's a good amount of people online.
When you're doing the basic block out, you said earlier that you don't have like, sub-millimeter, millimeter accuracy, but when you're placing the wheels,
Yeah.
do you have the accuracy to place them a specific distance so everything lines up correctly as you expect?
Well, that comes down to like reference, right? If we're trying to translate the information we see in the reference onto the 3D canvas. So it's more about like finding either good reference or observing it and kind of tweaking it until like it looks right. Like it's like everything I make is not going to be down like very, very precise, but it's going to be precise enough to get by, if you know what I mean.
Do you want another question?
No, I can, well, I mean, if anybody else has a question, yeah, we can do it.
Yeah, there's a UV question.
Okay.
And how you approach UVs on your models. But
Yeah.
if you have that lined up, continue forward.
Oh no, I don't have any UV. We can do the question.
Okay, yeah, that's the question. How do you manage UVs in your hard surface works?
UVs, I have a habit of not doing UVs in ZBrush.
You heard it.
Except for when it's like surface noise. Otherwise, I'll take it to another program to do UVs for.
Thank you.
So for the wheel here, we're going to talk about bolt placement. So there's a couple different ways we can kind of speed up the bolt placement. First is, let's use radial symmetry here. And I'm going to turn on X symmetry. Radial symmetry is in the transform, activate symmetry, turn on radial, and we want radial count of 6 here. Let's see here. And for this, see transform, we kind of want to do local sim. That way we have it right in the middle. And we'll bring up our, let's see, first we want to bring up our bolts. So I'll grab my fastener brush here. Wait for that to load real quick. So with the fastener brush, since it's already an IMM, what we're going to do is we're going to go straight to creating it a nano brush. So to do that, we'll go B, and then create nano mesh brush. Now, since it's multiple, we have all those options. Let me show you here. This is now all in the nano brush we just created. So I'll create something like this, and let's go here. We'll just drag it out. Now the benefit of this for nano mesh, as we go down to our nano mesh tab, is now we can do rotation and rotation variation. So now each one, let me zoom out a little bit so you can see it. We can rotate and variation that rotate to give it more of like a realistic approach here. right, so let's go to the next example. That'll be this one. Now, for this example, we want that nano mesh to be right here, but unfortunately, we don't have a poly that like sits there that we can put to insert and put it in. So for now, what I want to do is I want to bring up my primitives here, and we can grab a plane. We could just drag that out real quick. We'll split that off. And from here, we can turn off dynamic subdivisions. And now we can go back to our ZBrush that we created for the nano mesh that has all our fasteners in there. We can drag that out on this plane. And now we can go back, and let me turn off this here so you can see it better. Go back up here to our nano mesh tab, and now we still have that same option to rotate here. And if the planes are getting away for you, we can say, I don't want to show the placement. Now we can just have this in the scene. Okay, the next one. For this one, what I want to do real quick is I want to duplicate this. And since, let's see, we'll bring up our, not our Z-modeler one, but our regular fastener brush. And we'll go down to, say, geometry. Let's see here. Yep. Go down to geometry. And then we'll go to modify topology. And I want to say mesh from brush. That'll create that. So anything we select here is going to take it, and it'll say, we'll do this one. And say mesh from brush, and that's going to bring us right in and replace that subtool we duplicated. Now for this one, we want to go to array mesh. Turn on array mesh, and what I like to do is just hit reset real quick. And we want to make sure we lock position, lock size, and turn on transpose. We want to set the repeats to 10. Okay, and then we're going to bring it out. So here we go. Let's go here, back up to our subtool. Turn this back on. Okay, bring up W. Let's move it out so we can see it. Let's scale it down. Okay, and then let's go back here to array mesh. And our rotate, we want to go into Z amount 360. So now we can bring it out and place it where we want it. Now the problem with this is, sure, we can have array mesh here, but we don't have that variation in rotation. Well, ZBrush has a solution for that. All we have to do is click Convert to Nano Mesh. And now we can go back to our Nano Mesh tab. Let's say I don't want to show the placement. And now we can go and do our random variation on the rotation, just like we had before. Okay, so the next topic will be tackling topology. So if we have any questions.
Are there any questions?
No question.
No?
Okay.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Just to throw a question at you.
Okay.
Did you make all of these IMM brushes yourself?
Everything I'll show is what I made in ZBrush.
That's awesome.
Okay, so let's turn off that. And for this example, I'm going to show the flight stick I made for the helicopter, just so we have something different to look at. So for this example we're going to use, real quick, sometimes not everything's going to be clean. So let's grab this. And as you're working, you're going to have some kind of messed up topology here. Here. A couple things we can do to fix this. If you go ahead and just use the smooth brush, we're going to lose that volume. You can use, let's say, the alternate smooth where it tries to retain, but we're still going to kind of lose that volume. What I like to do is I like to go down here to morph target, store morph target. Now I can just smooth away, smooth those those polys out so it's nice and even. Then I go down here and say project morph. Now we can fix topology sort of like this. Another thing we can do is, I guess we can, let's talk about morph, target versus morph poly, because I'm sure some of you are thinking, why just not morph it, right? So here's a simple example to show this. So if I go ahead and just say, I'm going to polish by features, right? This is going to give us an example. Let's store our morph target first. Morph target, store morph target, polish by features. Now here's the difference. If I do project morph, it's going to project those points back to the volume of the mesh I had. If I didn't do it, if I use morph, now it's going to project those points back to the original space that it was stored in. So that's the key difference between morph and morph project. Now there's another way we can do this. A real simple way is, let's go back to our start here. We'll use this example again. Let's say I don't want to use the morph target. And I want to polish by features. And let's say I want to control click here to store it in our timeline. Come back to our polish by feature state. Now we can go to project, and now we can project from history. So if you don't like going down, scrolling all the way here, or you're not a fan of custom UI, it's real easy just to store a history point, and then if you're working in subtools only, just slide down a little and use project history, and it'll do the same thing as morph project. Right, moving along, let's go to here. So an issue you might run into is like, as I'm modeling, this already has the curve in here. And if way you might want to do it is maybe polygroup it and have ZModeler in there and try to scale it that way. But since it's curved ZModeler, it might be a little issue to get exactly what you want. So for the ZModeler brush, let's go BZM. It's a cool trick in here we can do with aligning. So we go align. I want straight lines, specific curvature at 0, align to tangent and line width. Now we can go through here and just line these up. Let's go here, here, here to here. Now we have a flat surface with a couple clicks. Another thing is, let's say I'm looking for an all quad mesh. And we modeled in, we closed holes, and we got these poles here. A cool thing that we can do, just get all quadded, is, let me bring out my brush here. We'll use this one here. And let's say, bring it up, we want 16. And we're going to use a technique called mesh fusion. So before we start, there's a couple things we got to know. We want individual polygroups when we do this. Another thing we want to do is we want to make sure smooth is off. Now what we can do is, if we drag over here, and then it's going to mask the model. We want to clear the model, and then control drag again, and now we're going to get something like that. We can do the same thing for this. Let's turn off, here, let's go here. Control drag, and it's gonna solve and just weld this together. All right. Okay, let's talk about creasing. So, turning on dynamic subdivision here, you're going to see when we crease and we have poles at a crease line, it's going to give us this weird artifacting. Now, there's a couple of ways we can go and fix this. Let's go back to our ZBrush. The first thing I want to do is go to Inset, say Polygroup Island, and then we'll switch it to Standard. And if we just crease it in here, see that we got rid of that pinching action. Another way we can do it, let's go to Extrude, Polyloop. And if we extrude it out here, you can see that we fixed it too. The benefit of this, we can go to Slide, Edge Loop Complete, add a little bevel to help it. So another thing we can do is say, I don't want to go through the process. There's a cool feature in here. Let me see where it's located. It is Crease, and it's called Bevel Width Slider here. So if we hold Control, Control is just going to bevel everything that's polygrouped. So we can go one shot and do it all. Okay, let's jump into some ZRemesher tips. So to create this, there's a couple steps we have to do. Since it's a complex shape, we want to kind of tackle it, systematically. So the first thing I want to do, actually, let's do this. Let me tell you what not to do first. So there's a couple things here of what not to do. First, we don't want to sculpt everything you see in the ref, because a lot of this stuff we don't need to ZRemesh. Another thing we don't want to do is we want to keep the bevels tight and not round. This rounded is going to hurt ZRemesher read the angle change. And the next thing we want to do is we want to set up our polygroups before we get to this stage. So what I like to do is I like to start just with simple primitives and block it out first. Set up the creasing, set up our polygroups, and get everything straightened out this way. Then I want to dynamesh it. Now we can keep our polygroups with the dynamesh, and that's going to be beneficial later on when we ZRemesh it. So an issue we have with dynameshing is you can see like these kind of aren't the best as far as like what ZRemesher is going to pick up, because it's going to pick up this stuff when it dips down. It's going to really ruin our edge flow and what ZRemesher like reads. So what we can do is we can say, I want to polish by features. So that's going to clean it up a little. But since it's high, what we want to do is just click this open circle, and it's a different algorithm. It's a little bit more aggressive, so we just slide it up a little. And now you see that, it's giving a more aggressive polish, and it's giving us this sharp edge that's going to really help ZRemesher read this. Okay. So with that, let's go to this one. So when we do this, we don't need everything for ZRemesher to work. The less information we give it, as far as geometry, the better it's going to respond. And on that same note, the more information you give it as far as instructions, the better it's going to respond to. So we want to delete unnecessary things like holes. We don't want to we want to delete the bottom here because that's extra polys is going to read. Also, if it's symmetrical, we want to turn on symmetry because it's just going to help us ZRemesher just perform much better. Now, from my experience, if it's symmetrical in one axis, you can just leave it at one axis turn on symmetry and it's fine. However, it's symmetrical in more than one axis. We want to delete by symmetry in both of those axes and then mirror it across. And I just found that it works a lot better if you give it less when it's more than one axis in symmetry. So after ZRemeshing it, this is kind of the result we get. And we could have ZRemeshed this, but I have another example to show you that I will go ahead and ZRemesh where you can see it in real time, what's happening. So for this instance, let me turn on the floor for you guys. See, floor. So we see it's not in the middle of the world, right? We have the gizmo here, and we turn on symmetry. We can see that since we have dynamic symmetry on, or dynamic local symmetry on, we can model on the same axis, and it is good. But if we try to ZRemesh it here with dynamic symmetry on, it's just not going to work. So workaround with that is if we go to the gizmo's gear and we say remesh by symmetry, now ZRemesher is going to look at just the gizmo orientation, and now we can say I want symmetry here. So now we can work in dynamic symmetry, and we can also ZRemesh based on that location too. Another cool thing about this is anything you set here in ZRemesher, the settings here, it's going to respect in the Gizmo's ZRemesher. So for this example, let's go ahead, let's turn off symmetry here. We don't need that. I want keep groups on, smooth groups to 0, and adaptive size to 25. And then I'll just run this cone here. And as you're running it, you can hold shift and it'll snap to 100 increments. And let's do 3,000. We can see ZBrush remeshed this with symmetry, not in the center of the world. It is pretty dense. I think it's about 1 million. And here we have it. And it is symmetrical on both sides. Okay. So next up is quick tips here. So this is an interesting one that I found over time is we have creasing here, right? And let me see here. Sometimes when we crease and we would say, oh, I don't need this edge loop anymore. So I'll go to insert, alternate, and this will happen. When I delete it, the crease is going to come right down to the pole. A workaround for this is if we hover to the side here and delete it, it's not going to converge down to the pole. So depending on where you click, it's going to respond differently. Let's see, another thing we want to talk about here is, so let's talk about delete. So we have delete edge loop complete and edge loop partial. So if we go edge loop partial, it's going to delete up to that point. Now if we hover and say delete edge loop complete, it's going to go right through it. Now we all know that holding Alt with single edge loop and multiple edge loop does the same feature, but they react differently. So if I hold Alt and click to delete, it's going to act like delete edge loop partial. And if I undo that and switch to multiple edge loop and hold delete, it's going to act like edge loop complete. So you can use that to your advantage. These two will have different algorithms when you hold Alt. So another interesting thing, so we have delete edge loop complete. You can control which side of the edge loop you want deleted. So if I hover, if this cursor is over on this side and delete, I'm gonna delete this side here. And if we go on this side and delete, now we know it's gonna delete on this side of the point. Okay, so next up. Any questions so far before I finish up the next 2 points?
You guys good on questions? I'm going through the chat here a little bit to see if there's anything that is relevant to what you're going on. I think really you've just, let's give a round of applause though for Henry so far. You're doing excellent. With some deep, deep gems that a lot of people online are like, we're going to have to rewatch this a bunch of times because there's just so much information. So great job.
Thank you.
No, I'd say let's keep it going.
Okay. All right, so next up is, let's talk about the Gizmo versus the transpose line for a minute. So for this, when we want to, like, for something really long, we want to, like, let's mask this first. Put it in here where we want here. And let's say, okay, I just want to kind of rotate this, reset here, and rotate it down. And I just want to kind of match. You can see the little bit of snapping here. That's kind of, sometimes that will get in the way. So what we could do is press Y, and we want to press R for this here. So let's drag this out here, and let's go ahead. And now we can go and just get a smoother, more predictable rotation. Also, we can say, let's click on this side. And you can see right here now, we can look at it from this angle and still rotate very smooth. Now let's say I don't want to switch to the transpose line. I want to stay in the Gizmo, and I don't want to change the size of the Gizmo either to keep on doing this fine tune. Now what made the transpose work so effectively is because we increased the radius of that rotation. And we can do the same thing with the Gizmo too. So if we click and we just push out, now we're increasing the rotation, the circumference of that rotation, and now we can get much more finer rotations with the Gizmo. And the final one is, let's say I want to work on this piece, right? And I want to shift click this arrow to snap it perpendicular to the camera. But however, without moving the part, I want this piece to be flush. So I can hold shift, move, let go, and now I can move in screen space rotation here just to align it. It's a neat little trick where you can, and it's not moving the model. You can see the grids moving it with too. Another interesting way we can do it, and it gives you an extra functionality, is if we press Y, go back to our transpose line here. If we hold Control, we can, in this circle, it does the same thing. The difference is if we hold Shift, now we can have snapping applied to that screen space rotation. Okay, that's it for me.
Okay. Let's give a big round of applause. Don't worry, we have some questions that just poured through because they were like, please ask. So the first one that came through on the chat, which is about subtools organization and the mindset.
Okay.
See, you have folders here. What
Yeah.
is your thought process when you start organizing your subtools and breaking down this model?
Yeah, so let's go back to the tank real quick. And let's turn this off. So as I'm working throughout the piece here, and initially it's going to start out small, but then the more parts you get, the more subtools you're going to try to find, is going to get cluttered. So what I like to do is once that starts happening, and we'll take this for example, I want to start in a new tool. So what I'll do is I'll clone it out. And then this is like a brand new space that is just clean. I can work anything I want. We can start like getting more subtools here. And when I'm ready, I can go back to my working file here. And then I'll say, you know what, let's insert it, because insert will put it right below the part I was working on. And then I can continue to work cleanly in new tools and then bring it back to my working file. As far as folders go, it's kind of like, I know the barrel here. This is kind of one section, big part of the section, the top, the wheels. Everything is based on a big chunk of what the model is. However, I do separate it out because bolts are kind of intense, welds are kind of intense, so I separate that out because if I'm planning to take it to another application, importing those in is kind of intense, so I kind of want to separate those out, and in case I need to, I can break those down easier into a folder, within the folder.
Wow, that's really informative. Thank you so much. I have another question from the chat, but I expect at least one more question, please. Just think of your questions. One that came through the chat was, what was your main source of learning these amazing contra codes of ZBrush, aka the techniques?
Just going through every single thing I can think of, and like, I probably went through every folder. You go over here, you can hold control, and they'll give you like hot tips. You go through the documentation. You just spam through, like Michael Pavlich. I think I've seen everything 3 times of Michael Pavlich at like 2 times speed.
I think we've all seen Michael Pavlich at 2 times speed.
It's like just to get through all that information he has of like, otherwise it would take 3 lifetimes to see all the information he has up there. I would also, like, it's just not the ZBrush stuff, it's also the modeling technique. So I just don't focus on ZBrush. I will learn from other people that does other software. And as they're doing it, I'm thinking, how can I do what they're doing and the technique they're doing and then translate that into ZBrush with the tools that they have.
It's fantastic. We are getting some more questions. Anybody here have a question? Yes, all right, coming on down. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I missed it or not, but could you demonstrate some of your macros?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So the first macro I want to talk about that I don't have here, but if you've ever seen any of my tutorials, you'll hear the word QC50 a lot. And that macro is from a plugin called the Drust Tools. It was created by Joseph Drust. And essentially what that does is it will crease by an angle. For 50, it'll be creased by 50 here. And then it'll go up to dynamic subdivision, turn on dynamic, and set the smooth subdivisions to 4. And it's just one click, it'll do all that. Some other things I have is, let's go back to, let me show you an example how to use it here. Let's go back to here. And let's go to topology here, grab this. Let's delete that. So let's say I want to see, let's bring up the move brush here. See, where you move, we'll just move this just to example here. So some of the ones I have is I'll have a mask border. Then I have a low poly, different settings here, and then high poly, different settings here. So what that will do, it will mask the border, invert the mask. It will blur the mask, and then it'll run a polish by features, I think about 3 times, and then it'll clear the mask. So if I do it you see that it'll do it. If I want a stronger one, I'll go to 50. And all 50 is I just go to polish by features, and then I'm just going to 50 here. So it's halfway. And the same principle is I have the mask polish. It does the same thing. It will mask the poly groups, invert the mask, blur it, run a polish, and then clear it.
All right, very cool, very cool. A couple more questions. Yes, round of applause, absolutely. We only have a few more minutes with you, but we do have a couple more questions that are coming through in chat. But I've taken some questions from chat. Does anybody else have a question here before we go back? Yes, sir, coming on down. All right.
Hey, Ian. Love your work. or not Yin, sorry, Henry.
Well, thank you, but
Yeah, I love your work too. How do you deal with scale? I noticed that a lot of your work is very precision-based, so it looks like the actual thing. How do you deal with scale in ZBrush? Scale and measurement.
Scale and measure, well, initially we talked about having a block out, and then we unify that. And that unify is now we have a consistent measurement that we can scale up or down depending on what we need. So for me, it's not based on like pure measurements. I'm not going for like millimeter precision. What I am doing is I'm trying to build a base block out. And from that, I'm trying to build everything in relationship to the other proportion. So I'm building the proportion of the part, and then I'm building that based on the relationship from the prior parts. So it's more like observation and then like a lot of references to keep me in check.
awesome, very cool. Another question coming through on the chat is about high poly to low, low poly, high poly. How do you maintain your low poly mesh? And do you push it through the game process where you're baking your highs onto your low?
So ZBrush can handle, it can handle game, it can handle film. It's just dependent on the end destination of your model. It's just a tweak of how you approach it. So you can collapse edges here just like you can with game models. For film, you can quad it up and model it that way. For print, I mean, you don't really have to worry about topology too much, but for games, it's more like you can build it here, and then your hard and soft normals you want to take someplace else, and then you want to scale it to specific measurements. You can, that same place, you can kind of, another application, you can go ahead and do all that. For maintaining the low, it's just like any other application. You just build it. ZBrush is not that different when it comes to poly modeling than any other application. It's just a slightly different tweak of how to approach it and the workflow involved.
Awesome, thank you. Do we have any other questions here in person? Yes.
Hello. So I feel like starting off on a hard surface model, one of the hardest things is finding a comprehensive breakdown of your reference. So I wondered if there's any keywords or sources that you are kind of like your go-tos for when you're starting out on a new project.
So the breakdowns as far as like the reference, or my breakdowns?
Breakdowns is in terms of the reference.
Okay, in terms of the reference, okay. In terms of reference, so I mean, like everybody, we're going to start with Google, right? But the difference is, I'm going to go to the websites, and there's going to be images in there that won't be indexed by Google. Also, I want to go to the websites because I want to learn the part names. So if you re-put those part names into Google, it's going to give you different images based on that. Also, it might give you some close-up images of it. Another thing is I use YouTube, and YouTube is interesting because for hard surface, it's going to give you a kind of more like walk-arounds will give you different angles that you won't find on images. Some parts in a hard surface is going to have stores online. So you can go search those stores, and they're going to have like schematics and breakdowns of the parts for replacement that you can buy. And they're going to have some interesting and very accurate measurements as far as that.
Awesome. And last question, but not least, if we didn't get to your question, or you think of a question, which always happens to me, Henry will be outside, so you could definitely come and talk to him. Last question, which is, when did you learn that ZBrush was the right fit for you and your workflow? How did you discover that this was the best tool for it? Okay,
that happened probably maybe 6 months after 4R7 came out. It was still a little bit of challenge to model low poly then, but I did see where ZBrush was headed as far as like it's more of a liberating and more of like an unbroken type of modeling where everything stays on the canvas. Now, where it became very powerful is ZBrush 4.8, when they started implementing the deformers, and they started getting the Gizmo, and they started getting booleans. And that's where it started really branching out. And every release after that, it was just icing on the cake.
Wow, that's perfect. Well, thank you again, Henry, for this amazing presentation. Let's give a loud, warm round of applause for Henry Chervenka. Thank you so much.